Welcome back, I'm Chase, and this is All Things Rome. Today we are looking at the Proxima Uni-Dive 200 meter cycle. Now, those who love vintage aesthetic without the hassle of a vintage watch, this watch may be for you. Every characteristic on this watch that I'm going to be talking about in this video offers both pros and cons. And I give you an example. Like the finishing that I'll be talking about, some of the finishing is worse than I would consider. By finishing, I mean like between the links. However, if you think about it like this, it actually adds more to the vintage style, the vintage appeal, the vintage aesthetic. So is it really a bad thing? Well, not necessarily, because that's not how the watches were made back then. This does have some good quality features and a couple maybe grimes that I have sort of at the end. So let's just flip the camera around and get right into the review. Okay, and here is the Proxima Uni-Dive 200 meter cycle diver. So first what we're gonna do is go over the measurements of this watch. We'll go over the sizing and we'll go over all the pros and cons. As you can see, this is highly reflective. I wish they would have used like a better anti-reflective coating on this, but we're gonna do with what we can in the studio here. Now, first thing you notice is this has a big domed crystal on it, and that crystal is sapphire, which is amazing because most companies will not do a domed sapphire crystal. They'll do a flat piece of sapphire crystal only because it saves them money in the end. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and just measure it out right away. So we're looking at 40 millimeters in diameter. We're looking at a height of almost 16, and that's strictly because of that high dome sapphire crystal. A lug width of 19.64, so we'll call that 20, and a lug to lug of 48. Okay, so first let's talk about this watch and the elephant in the room. Yes, this looks exactly like a vintage diving watch. From the large lugs that have poor finishing on the inside, to the press clasp, to the high domed sapphire crystal. And you know what? That's actually one of the things that I like the most about this watch is the high domed sapphire crystal. It's hard to really complain about that because most watch companies won't do that. Okay, let's talk about the dial real quick and then we'll dive into everything else. The dial is basically like a matte black dial. Unicorn just underneath the 12 o'clock. It says Uni-Dive 200 meters cycle diver. Let's just get into the movement so we can sort of see the dial layout just a little bit better. Now this is an NH35, so it does have hacking and hand winding. Let's go ahead and just move this out of the way. You can see that instead of having a date window at the 3 o'clock, it has a date wheel around the entire inside. You can see there's sort of a chapter ring on the inside that acts as a date line. And you can see right now it's on the 18th. So let's just go ahead and cycle this over to midnight or around midnight. And you can see that about 10:30, just like any NH35s, it starts to tick over. And then right there, just before midnight, it ticks over just fine. We'll hit the first pull and then we'll sort of adjust the date. You can see it going back and forth just fine, no worries at all. Now it does have, here's sort of the first thing that I'm going to talk about when it comes to this watch. In two spots, it sort of blocks the date arrow. One is at the 26th and the other one is over here at the 5 to 6. So the 5 basically halfway gone, the 26 halfway gone. Down here at the 6 o'clock position, actually, this doesn't affect it at all. It's clear as day. In fact, when they sort of did this layout, you can see that they had to be able to make the dial in one piece. If not, then it just makes it more complicated, much more expensive. Well, I think they did an overall good job. Has interesting different hour markers and a chapter ring along the outside. This is all loomed. I'll show you the lume closer to the end. Now the case is 316L stainless steel with brushing on the top. high polished on the sides, and it does have drilled lugs, which is nice. Again, more that vintage aesthetic. On the back, it does have a screw down case back. Says sapphire, has a nice little manta ray there. The bracelet is this is a single link. However, it looks like it's 3 links, and it does have sort of a 5-link effect. Has brushed on the outer, middle, and outer again, and then it has like high polished lines in between, sort of breaks up the brushing and actually looks really good. Now here's one of the aesthetics that looks vintage, is you can see that the brushing on the upper part of the case looks sort of circular here, and the brushing on the bracelet is more of a horizontal or a vertical if you look at it this way. So the brushing doesn't match, but again, that's sort of the overall aesthetic of vintage watches. But they even went so far as to high polish the end of the lug here. So it does offer a nice little like break in its finishing. Like I said, bracelet looks like a 3-link, has very long links. So it's, again, more aesthetic. In fact, this is more indicative of like the 1950s, 1960s style of bracelets. Into a press safety clasp. This, I think, was just to really save money. However, unsigned basic press clasp, that's not really a big deal for me, especially because the overall look of this watch is more vintage. Now the bezel is 120 clicks, and one of the things that I really like about this bezel is it has a sapphire insert as opposed to just a steel or ceramic sapphire. Sapphire insert, sapphire glass, NH35, which is a workhorse movement. And really the only thing that you may not like about this watch is the dial. And that's actually sort of my thing, is everything on this watch looks very good. I'm happy with the sapphire crystal. I'm happy with the sapphire insert. I'm not that happy with the coin edging on the bezel because it's extremely hard to grip. But, you know, the vintage aesthetic is there, right? Shallow on the coin edge, not really a big fan of that, but it still works like it should, 120 click. And one of the things that I really like about this watch is the lume. The lume looks amazing to me. So let's talk about the lume for just a second. The lume is not only lumed on the dial, but even the unicorn is lumed. The bezel is lumed underneath that sapphire insert. I mean, this whole thing just shines bright. And even in the 60-watt studio lighting, this thing just, now to the naked eye, it's not that bright under the 60-watt studio lighting. However, when I wear this thing on my wrist and I walk in from outside, this thing is just, I basically can use it like a flashlight. It is so bright and brilliant. It's actually pretty amazing. It does have green lume, which some people are turned off on. However, again, more towards the vintage aesthetic. If they use like an ice blue lume, it would sort of take away from the whole aesthetic of this watch. Let's go ahead and toss it on the wrist. Now here's the watch on my 7¼ inch wrist, and right now it fits really well. It actually fits almost perfectly. It's a little warm here in the studio, so my wrist is slightly swollen, so it fits well. However, with the micro adjustments here on the side, you can't adjust them on the fly. Basically, when it's a little chilly outside, like when I wear this to work and I start off the day, it is a little loose on the wrist and it tends to fall down. However, as the day goes on, it sort of just snugs right up and it doesn't get overly tight on the wrist. It is extremely comfortable with this bracelet, and honestly, like I said, really like the overall vintage aesthetic. I really love the distortion of the crystal. Yeah, it does sit a little high. Some people would complain that it does sit a little high, but honestly, on the wrist, it doesn't sit as high as you would think. Most watches that are a little bit bigger, this has a very small footprint right here across your wrist, with the lug-to-lug being slightly smaller. So it doesn't have a giant presence on the wrist. 40 millimeters, but it wears more like a 39 millimeter. And even though it's 16 millimeters high, it wears more like a 14 millimeter watch. So it does have a little heft on that height. However, I would prefer this over the Tudor Black Bay when it comes to how it feels on the wrist. Basically, if you wear it on the wrist, it wears smaller than what the dimensions would assume. So keep that in mind. Again, 7¼ inch wrist, and this thing, it feels really well. And with that dome sapphire, it's really hard to, beat this at the price point. Now, honestly, for a watch just hovering over $200, this is not a bad deal, especially when it comes to that great domed sapphire crystal. Now, even Rolex doesn't offer a domed sapphire crystal. Their stuff is flat, right? Flat sapphire. They don't even offer AR coating. This at least has a giant dome sapphire crystal. In fact, it's great because even the Omegas, you can still buy an Omega Speedmaster with a Hesalite crystal, right? Hesalite has its pros and cons also, right? You can hit it, bang it around. It only scratches, it does not shatter. It will sort of deform or flex slightly. So it is great if you're doing a lot of activities and stuff like that. But again, it does scratch easy. Whereas something like this heavily domed sapphire gives you the scratch resistance and still gives you that vintage look and aesthetic if you want something more vintage. A lot of pros, a lot of cons, like I said in the video. However, I think overall, it's hard to beat this watch. Now, if the unicorn's not for you, well, that's just a small nitpicky thing. I don't mind it at all. In fact, I love just the overall aesthetic. I mean, it even has a sapphire insert on the bezel. So it's super hard to find a watch that has all of sort of these qualities, these checks off the list, right? A heavily domed sapphire crystal, a insert, nice brushing on the top of the case, high polished on the outside, right? A really nice vintage aesthetic. Yes, it does have a press clasp. Like I said, that could be a sort of a moan. However, not really. It sort of just adds the overall vintage appeal. And you know what? When you have a watch that ranges between $200 and $300, it's really hard to offer all those high quality things without cutting corners somewhere. And honestly, I think they cut corners in all the right places because, like I said, it just adds more to the entire vintage aesthetic of the watch. Now, if you like videos and videos like this, hit that subscribe button down below. Leave a comment on the content you guys would like to see on this channel. I literally have watches just sitting on my desk here that I need to review. Also products that I need to review because this is all things random. Priority is watches. However, I also have some other things to review. For example, I have a wireless microphone kit that I'll be getting in that I'll review for like vlogging and stuff like that because like me, I use a wired mic, a Comica wired mic that attaches right to my phone that I'm looking into right now. Yes, I use my iPhone 11. I don't even have a camera for this channel, but I do what I can with what I have. So when I find something that I like, something that I'm going to purchase, something that I'm going to review that has to do with maybe upgrading my channel, I'm going to bring it to you guys in case you guys are interested in upgrading your own channels if you guys are content creators or you want to become content creators. I also have things like wireless earbuds that I have because guess what? It is quickly becoming summer outside. I got my longboard I'm going to take out and I could really use a good pair of headphones while I'm riding my longboard or running because I'm in a 100-day challenge to get myself back into some sort of fitness level that's not obesity. Anyways, if you guys find that interesting, hit that notification bell. Like I said, literally have all this stuff that I'm doing. I'm basically gonna release a video every 3 days, if not every 2 days, but time just sort of gets away from you in this crazy thing we call life. Anyway, like I said, hit that notification bell and I'll see you in the next one.